Love one another the way I loved you. Not long before saying these words, Jesus had stripped down in front of his disciples and prepared to wash their feet as if he were a common, ordinary servant. He was their rabbi, for goodness sake, their mentor, their teacher and miracle worker, their master and Messiah. And here he was behaving as if he were just a common, ordinary Joe. And he goes on to say as much. He says they aren't his servants, but his friends, his equals. Later, as they would reflect on his words, the disciples would realize he had even washed the feet of the very person whom he knew would be responsible for his own torture and death. Is this what he meant when he commanded them to love one another? Is this what he means for you and me to love one another? Am I expected to treat the person who would like to see me destroyed as a friend? How can I, with all my prejudices, love everyone equally like Jesus, whose love excluded no one from his beloved community? Do his words apply to a world where just a few days ago Israel's prime minister promised to launch a raid on the southern Gaza city of Rafah, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are sheltering from the almost 7-month-long war? When a queer person discovers that their own family supports the anti-LGBT legislation that targets that person's health and welfare, how are they expected to embrace Jesus' command to love one another? When one political party fears fascism and extremism while the other party fears the loss of power and moral values, when these fear factors cause family members to stop talking to each other, where does love one another fit in? Well, I don't have a solid answer to these questions, but I think part of our problem is when we turn these situations into single story circumstances. And on a more personal level, I think we're unable to love other people because we have reduced them and their behavior to a single story. Nigerian novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie tells how her college roommate was only able to see her through the lens of a single story. I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well, and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music, and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. So after I had spent some years in the U.S. as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. Adichie concludes by saying, stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. Jesus seemed to be able to see people beyond their single story. When he encountered Zacchaeus, he saw someone who was more than a tax collector who made his living by cheating others. When he encountered a Samaritan woman at a water well, he saw someone who was more than a despised foreigner come to draw water at high noon. When he bent to wash the feet of the man who would betray him to the authorities, he saw more than a traitor. Jesus was able to see beyond the single story of people. And I think that was his key to loving people. And I think it's key to our obedience to his command to do the same. On February 22nd, Laken Riley, a 22-year-old American nursing student at Augusta University, was abducted and killed while she was jogging at the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia. Her body was found in the Oconee Forest Park near Lake Herrick. Her death was caused by blunt force trauma. Jose Ibarra, a Venezuelan migrant who entered the country illegally, is accused of the murder. Headlines such as "Suspect in Murder of Georgia Nursing Student Entered U.S. Illegally," ICE says, continue to highlight Ibarra's immigration status, reinforcing the belief that immigration and crime go hand in hand. Something in keeping with a long-standing tendency to make immigrants scapegoats for a variety of social problems, including alcoholism and disease. Prompted by the murder incident, one woman posted the following on social media: "There are too many senseless murders, and so many of the most recent crimes are being committed by illegal aliens. Enough is enough. They have let too many or brought too many in our country that are doing harm, and we are already in a lawless country." Her son replied saying, "The fact remains that undocumented immigrants are nearly 40% less likely to commit crimes than those who are documented citizens. Individual instances of crime don't represent a wave, trend, or increase." The woman, deaf to any story beyond the single story that had been driven into her by the news outlet she tunes into, replied, "Can we respectfully agree to disagree? Unfortunately, illegal immigrants are ticking up, and the crime is coming with them, with drugs, gangs, and other concerns." How can Jesus possibly expect us to love one another as he loved? Part of what we can begin to do is to open our ears to the inevitability that each of us is more than a single story. The trauma we have experienced, the values that have been embedded into us, the prejudices that are a part of our makeup, as well as the plethora of our life experiences, are the different stories of who we are. As we go through the week, We might try imagining the multiple stories that make up the tired-looking clerk checking us out at the grocery store, or the frustrated mother in the grocery line whose child won't stop screaming, or the man outside the store asking for a handout so he can get something to eat. And if you're able to go a bit further, imagine the multiple stories that have come together to make up the person you just can't stand. In each case, even if you can't love them the way Jesus did, maybe you can let go of your single story of why they are the way they are. And when you do, see how that feels inside. Amen.